Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Aniruddha, call sign VU3FML. In this video, we are going to look into making your own code plug for your digital radio in an easy to understand way. This video will help you in getting started with your new digital radio. Now there are different enhancements and optimizations you can do, but the intention of this video is to help you take that first step in programming your radio. This video refers to the Anytone 878 UV handy, but the concept can be used for other radios as well. So let's get started. This figure shows the different ways in which you would be using your radio. For example, this is your radio. It may be a handheld device or a base station. It will be VHF, UHF with a DMR facility like the Anytone 878. The first way you may be communicating is analog a VHF or UHF simplex. For example, in my city, we use the frequency 145.1 to have a VHF simplex communication with other hams. Since it is a simplex communication, the RX and TX frequency is the same. So we transmit on 145.1 and we receive on 145.1 as well. The second type of communication you might be doing is communicating with a local analog repeater. It could be VHF or UHF. For example, in my city, there is a analog VHF repeater. The downlink frequency for that is 145.1 and the uplink frequency is 145.7. So which means that we receive from the repeater on 145.1 and we transmit to the repeater on 145.7. The third way you may be using your radio is communicating through your digital repeater in your city. So, for example, in one of the cities in India, we have a digital UHF repeater. So, you may be transmitting to that repeater using the frequency 434.07, and you will be receiving from that repeater on 435.67. It is a UHF digital repeater. Now, along with the frequencies, there are some other parameters that need to be configured in your radio to have a successful communication. This particular repeater requires you to set the color code as 7. There are other parameters, namely time slot, which is indicated by TS, that needs to be configured. For example, if you wish to go through the repeater to the DMR network to access different talk groups or private IDs, you need to configure your radio with time slot 1. And if you want to go through the repeater for local digital communication, then you need to assign the time slot as 2. Now, there may be a case that your city does not have a digital repeater. So, you may be using a personal hotspot. For example, we do not have a digital repeater in my city. And so, I'm using a MMDVM along with Raspberry Pi Zero W hotspot for my communication to the different DMR networks. So If I want to get on to certain talk groups on certain DMR networks, I go through the hotspot. Now, similar to the digital repeater, the hotspot also needs to be configured with RX frequency and TX frequency. But since I have a simplex hotspot, both the frequencies are same. So my radio transmits to the hotspot using 434.5 and receives from the hotspot with 435.5. Similar to the digital repeater, we need to define the color code, which I have defined as color code 1 and time slot 2 in the hotspot, and similar way in the radio as well for this particular communication. The last way that you may be using your radio is a digital simplex communication. It may be VHF or UHF. So, for example, in my city, we have a digital simplex communication on a VHF, and we use the frequency 144.1 with color code 1 and time slot 1. Since it's simplex communication, the RX and TX transmission and receiving frequency remains the same. So, if you have noticed, for digital communication, you need to define four parameters: the RX frequency, the TX frequency, the color code, and the time slot, which can be seen in digital repeater configuration, in hotspot configuration, as well as the digital simplex configuration. We will be programming each case in our code plug for our radio. So let's get started and create different channels for each of these modes of operation. So here I have opened the computer programming software. This is the computer programming software for Anytone 878 UV. But like I said before, the concept remains the same for other radios as well. So the first thing that you need to do is connect your radio using the provided programming cable to your laptop, and then you can go to this icon over here, which is the communication setting. Click on the assigned COM port and click OK. Now the communication with the radio has started. We are communicating with the radio to extract the original settings from the radio into the software and then saving them onto your hard disk. So just in case, while making your new code plug, if you make a mistake and you want to go back to the original settings, you can just load those settings and write to the radio so that the original settings will be restored into the radio. So to do that, once you have connected to the radio, go to program and read from radio. Once you read from the radio, you will see something like this. These are some of the original settings that were there in the radio. Now you can go to file and click save as, and then you can save as uh, the you can save name it as original settings or something. Original .rdt is the code plug extension. So I'm just saving it. Okay, so now we have saved the original settings from the radio. It's time to make a new code plug. So I'm just going to go to file and new. You can click yes, and you can store the current to the original.rdt. Okay, all data will be reset. So that means the data in the software will be resetted and you will get a blank template to start with. So, okay, Now here you can see the name new.rdt. The first thing that we need to do is go to the radio ID list and double click here, and you can enter your DMR ID 4040315. That's mine. And I will, as a name, I will put my call sign PU3FML. Press OK. So this is the first step that you need to do. Put your call sign and your DMR ID. The second step that you need to do is you need to go to this website. I will put the link in the description below, or you can simply Google search the DMR ID CSV file download. So what we are doing is we are downloading the entire database of DMR IDs, which we will be importing into the software. So here, the first file you see is worldwide contacts. You can click it, and a zip file will be downloaded. You can extract the contents of the zip file. I have already done that. So here you see this is the zip file, and I have extracted it. And this is the CSV file. This contains the DMR IDs of everyone in the world. So we are going to import this file into the software. So what we need to do is we need to go to the tool and import, and we click on the digital contact list, and then we select the CSV file and open it. We press the import button and the importing will start. So this takes some time. I will pause the video here and come back when the import is finished. Okay, the import has been completed. We'll press OK and go and check the digital contact list here. It will take a few seconds to read the list. This list will now contain the DMR IDs of everyone worldwide. There you go. The, the next step is to go to the channel. These are the channel that were there, for example. So we'll just delete them. We'll start with a blank template. Okay, so let's start one by one. Let's double click at the first slot. Now we have to define the channel name. Let's go back quickly to our screen here. Let's define for the analog VHF simplex type of communication. So we are going to define a channel for analog VHF simplex. The frequency is 145.1. Let's get back to our screen and write the channel name as analog VHF SI for simplex. You can name anything as long as you can identify it. The receive and transmit frequency will be 145.1. 145.1. Since it's simplex, both the frequency will be same. Channel type will be analog. Transmit power will be the highest, that is turbo. Bandwidth will be 25K since it's analog. The rest of the settings will remain the same, nothing to be changed. We'll press OK. And now we have defined the analog VHF simplex channel for the frequency 145.1. Let's go back to our screen. The next type of communication will be through an analog repeater. So we are going to define analog VHF repeater channel for the frequencies 145.1 and 145.7. So let's get back. Let's double click on slot 2 Let's name the channel as analog VHF, REP for repeater. Okay. Uh, the frequencies, RX frequency will be 145 decimal 1. Transmit frequency will be 145 decimal 7. Type of channel will be analog. Highest power 12 25K will be the bandwidth. Uh, Now here for the repeater in my local area, there are no CTCSS DCS settings. So I'm going to keep it off. But if you have a repeater where these settings are used, you can get that information, and you can put the values, whatever they are here, and define them. So right now I'm going to just keep it off. Okay, and I'm going to press OK. So we have defined the analog VHF repeater communication as well. Now let's go back to the screen. Now the third type of communication that we want to define is through digital repeater. Now for digital repeater, we know there are four parameters that we need to define: the RX frequency, TX frequency, color code, and time slot. Now for this particular repeater, they have defined the color code as 7. These are the RX and TX frequencies, as we know. Now, if we want to access the DMR network, for example, Brandmeister network talk group, through this repeater, they have defined as time slot 1. And if you want to have a communication through the digital repeater um, into digital devices, the digital radios locally, then they have defined it as time slot 2. So you may ask, from where are you getting this information? So let's get back to our screen and let's go to the repeater book. Here you will get all the information. So the downlink and uplink frequency. So this is the receiving frequency from radio's perspective. This is the transmitting frequency. And then you get the color code also. Usually you get the information about time slot also on the repeater book. But if you don't have it, you can always go to Brandmeister and into repeaters, and you can search for that particular repeater. For example, the repeater that we are configuring for is this one. Yeah. So here it is. You get the color code and you get slot 1 linked. So time slot 1 is configured for the Brandmeister. So, okay, going back to our configuration, back to our screen. So for Brandmeister, time slot 1 is defined. And if there is a need to do digital communication locally, then time slot 2 is defined. Okay. So let's say, for example, we want to define for a talk group called India. The talk group ID is 404. How do we find out that? Is if we go to Brandmeister again, into data visualization and talk groups. And here, if we search India, you will get the talk group ID. So that's what we are doing. So if we want to uh, make the configuration for use of digital repeater to talk into the Brandmeister network on talk group 404, then we need to do as follows. We'll go back to our. Okay. So first we need to define the talk group India with talk group ID 404 as one of the contacts. So we go to here, contact oblique talk groups. We double click on the slot 1. Here we can write as, since we are going through digital repeater, let's say we'll write digital repeater TG India, TG India. Okay, something like this. And the talk group ID is 404. Press OK. So we have defined the talk group as a contact, okay, by giving the ID here. Now we go to the channel and click here, and we can write the name as again we are going through a digital repeater, and we are going to talk into talk group India, something like that. Yeah. So what will be the frequencies here? Let's go back to the screen. RX is 435.67 and TX is 434.07. So we will be going through the repeater. So we need to put its frequencies, right? So back to the screen, and let's put the frequencies here as 435 decimal 67 as RX and 434 decimal 07 as TX. All right. The channel type will be digital. Transmit power will be the highest turbo. TX permit always. No other changes here. DMR mode will be repeater in this case because we are going through a digital repeater. And contact, if we press here, we have defined the contact for the talk group of India, and we double click it. So the contact will be this. So the color code, we saw that it has been defined as 7, and time slot is defined as 1 for Brandmeister. We saw that earlier. Okay, no other changes are required. We'll press OK, and we have defined the channel for a digital repeater accessing talk group 404 on the Brandmeister network. So this link we have established right now. Now let's say you want to use the same digital repeater to make digital communication with local radios or local users. So as we saw earlier, it is defined as time slot 2 for that purpose. So the RxTX remains the same, the color code remains the same, but the time slot will change. Of course, like we defined for India, we need to define local as one of the contacts. So let's get back to our screen. We will go to the contact, okay, and double click here and write as local. Okay. Now, locally, you can use the talk group ID as 99 and press OK. Okay, let's go back to channel, and we can now just copy this because most of the information is same. We can copy the earlier channel down below and then double click it. We'll just change this. So for example, digital repeater, uh, maybe you can write local, right? Now these frequencies remain the same. All this information remains the same. Even DMR mode will be repeater, but we need to change the contact to local. Okay. The color code will be the same, but slot will be ES2. All the other information remains the same, and we press OK. So now we have created this channel through the repeater digital communication to local devices. Now let's say we want to make the digital communication through this digital repeater onto a talk group. Uh, let's say the talk group of New Delhi, whose ID is 40430. So how do I know that? Because you can search. Yeah, 40430. So going back, now we need to first define a contact like we did for India talk group. We need to define it for New Delhi. So digital repeater DR talk group, and let's say New Delhi as ND. Okay, we saw the talk group number as 40430, and okay. So we have created a contact for New Delhi ND. We go to the channel. Now, like we made for India talk group, we can just copy paste it below because most of the information will be the same. Okay, double click it. We change it to not to India but ND for New Delhi. The name, the frequencies remain same. All this information remains same. DMR mode is repeater, but now the contact needs to be changed to New Delhi. Color code same. Slot is 1. Why 1? Because we are going to the Brandmeister network and not local. So slot is 1. Everything remains the same. We press OK. So we have defined now this channel again one more time, but for the talk group of New Delhi. Likewise, you can make the channels for any number of talk groups. For every talk group, you need to define a contact earlier and then select that contact into the channel. Okay, I hope it is clear so far. The next part we are going to see is communication to the hotspot. Now, let's say your city does not have a digital repeater. For example, my city does not have a digital repeater. So I have to use a personal hotspot to get to the DMR network. So let's define a talk group. Let's define a talk group worldwide whose ID is 91, and we want to configure it through hotspot. Now, like there were these parameters defined for repeater, there are parameters defined for hotspot as well. And these are defined in the PyStar software, which resides on the SD card. We'll look into it in some other video. But for the sake of this video, we will consider that the RX and TX frequencies are considered are 434.5 because it is a simplex hotspot. The color code defined is 1 and time slot defined is 2. So we need to consider these parameters into our radio for having communication. So back to our screen. So let's go to contact talk group. Double click here. We need to make a contact. Now, since we are going through the hotspot, let's say hotspot worldwide talk group. Okay, let's say talk group worldwide. Okay, that's the name we are giving. Now, the ID, the talk group ID for worldwide is 91. You can see it in the talk group list on Brandmeister network website. We press OK. So we have created a talk group contact for worldwide. Let's go to channel and we can double click here. Now let's define the channel hotspot so that we come to know that it's going through hotspot, talk group and worldwide. Okay. Now the frequencies. Now for frequencies, you can see that we have defined 434.5 for both. Back to our screen, 434.5 at both. 434.5. Okay, the channel type is digital. Now, since the hotspot will be kept in our house, we need not have transmit of power too high. We can keep it low. Bandwidth will be 12.5 since it is digital. The DMR mode will be simplex because it is a simplex hotspot. Now the contact we need to select is the worldwide contact on hotspot. We double click. Color code is 1 and slot is 2. This is what we had defined in the hotspot. So we have put the same settings here. Rest of it remains the same, and I click OK. So going back to our screen, we have defined this communication. So from radio going through the hotspot into the Brandmeister network and into a particular talk group. So you can define any number of talk groups using this method. Just create a digital contact, talk group contact for each talk group, and then select that particular contact in the channel. Coming back to our screen, let's see, let's define one more just as an example. So let's define a talk group of Kerala through hotspot. So back again, we need to first define it as a contact. We go here, right? We are going through hotspot, talk group, uh, Kerala. Okay. So what's the talk group ID for Kerala? We can always check on Brandmeister. Let's just write Kerala, and it is 40407. Back here and just write 40407. Press OK. So we have defined a contact, talk group contact here. We go to channel. Now we can copy this hotspot channel because the frequencies will remain the same, right? Double click on the pasted one. Change this to Kerala. Okay, let's keep it uniform. Capital letters Kerala. The frequencies is the same. All these things are same, but we need to change the contact of the Kerala which we made here. Color code slot remains the same because it is through the hotspot, and press OK. That's it. This is the way you can make different channels for different talk groups or different uh, repeaters. Now let's go back to our screen. One more type of communication is left, which is the digital uh, VHF simplex communication. So we have decided amongst ourselves in our city that we will be using this frequency and this color code, which is 1 and time slot 1, to do local simplex digital communication. So what we need to do is go to the contact talk group. But now here we had already defined a local contact talk group 99. We have already defined this as a contact. So we need not make it one more time. We are going to do local digital communication. For that, we have defined talk group ID as 99. So what we will do is we'll go to the channel. We'll double click here. We'll put here as, uh, let's say, simplex SI VHF digital, or the other way. We'll write it the other way. Digital DI uh, VHF and SI for simplex. You can write anything as long as you are able to identify it. Now the frequencies, it is simplex, so both frequencies will be same. We have decided 144.1. Okay, so it will be a digital communication. Transmit power will be the highest because it will be radio to radio. These things remain the same. DMR mode will be simplex because it is simplex communication. The contact will be changed to local. So the color code we have decided is 1 and slot also as 1. The rest of the settings remain the same. I click OK. And there you have it. We have a simplex channel on VHF for digital communication. That's it. Uh, Going back to our screen, we have covered all the different types of communication. In this way, you can go on adding any number of repeaters, any number of simplex connections, any number of hotspots you want. Now, this is not enough. We have defined the channels, but if you upload these channels right now to your radio, they won't be visible because it is necessary for the channels to be put into a zone. Now, what is zone? See the section here is called zone. What is a zone? Let's say I have defined certain frequencies for my city, which is Pune. So for all the repeaters in Pune, for all the simplex frequencies in Pune. And if I travel to Mumbai, Mumbai will have its own set of frequencies for simplex, for repeaters, analog repeaters, digital repeaters, etc. So I can define a zone called Pune and put all the channels of Pune into that zone. And I can define another zone called Mumbai and put all the channels that were defined for the Mumbai into that zone. So putting the channels into zone is important. So for this purpose, for this example, I'm just going to define one zone. Let's call it anything. Let's call it just the zone. Okay, let's call it just zone, and let's just put all the defined channels into it. Okay, and press OK. So these are our channels. These are our channels. There are 8 of them, and they are put into the zone, all 8 of them. Okay. So now if you upload this code into the radio, your channels will be visible. Now going ahead, there are certain other settings as well. For example, optional settings. If I double click onto them, I get a lot of settings here. These are radio specific settings. So these are for Anytone 878, and they may be same for other radios as well. But this particular section is for the Anytone 878. And I will be covering these settings in detail in another video. But just to give you an example, here on power on, I can have a custom character. For example, my DMR ID or call sign. So this will be visible on boot up. I can put my DMR ID as well. So as the radio boots up, these characters will be displayed. Uh, Working mode, let's say the display mode is channel. So to start with, your channel will be visible and you can go on changing the channels. So these are the things, and I will cover these in the next video. But just to show you, these are some of the settings that can be made uh, before you upload. So let's just click OK. So that's it. Right now, we can save this code plug. Okay, as let's call it new code plug. Okay, so we have defined this, and let me just put it on desktop. Save file. Okay, so that's it. You have defined a code plug, and now the only thing left to do is go here and write to radio. Click on digital contact list for uploading it for the first time and press OK. So I will show you a short clip of the code plug in my radio to give you an example of how I have done it. So these are some of the channels that I have defined in my radio. These are different than the example that we saw earlier. In this way, you can easily design your own code plug and program your radio and use the analog and digital channels. I hope you enjoyed my video. If you have enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. And also, if you have not already subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. It gives me great motivation to bring new content for you. Thank you very much once again.